Good morning again, and welcome to our story time on a Friday morning. It's lovely to have our New Life Church children with us and all those who might be visiting with us. And it's good to have you, Chantalie and Ulrich, back with us again this morning as well. So let's remember what we have been doing. We have been talking about a book called The Greatest Story. And who was it written by? Kevin DeYoung. And it was illustrated, which means the pictures were done by a man named Don Clark. And I think the story and the pictures are beautiful. So I'm thankful that they wrote this book, that we get to enjoy it. So we have done 2 chapters so far. In the first chapter, we saw about God, Adam, and Eve. In our second chapter, we learned about God and different stories about sinful man. But what did we always see? That God is keeping his promise to his people. And that's what we're going to continue reading about today in chapter 3. Okay, so all ears, come closer, children, and let's listen to what God has to say to us today through our story. Not too long after the whole tower business, God called a man named Abraham to leave his home and go to a new country. Actually, his name was Abram at this point, but everyone remembers him as Abraham. When God called Abraham, he made a lot of big promises. He promised to bless Abraham and to bless everyone who blessed Abraham. He promised to curse everyone who cursed Abraham. He promised Abraham a land and a child. God promised that Abraham would be the father of a great nation and that all nations would be blessed through him. Pretty much all the blessings that God wanted to give Adam and Eve, he promised to Abraham. And the best part, this time God was going to do everything himself to make sure Abraham got his blessing. You might think that God wanted to bless Abraham because he was such a swell, good guy. But actually, Abraham didn't know God at all when God called him. And even after he got the call and all those promises, Abraham could still be a liar and a bit of a scaredy cat. That's a funny word. Hey, Abraham was a scaredy cat. Abraham's life had a lot of ups and downs, but he had 2 things going for him, and the only 2 things, it turned out, that really mattered. God's promise to bless him and Abraham's belief in God's promises. And that was faith. Do you remember we learned about that the last time? That faith is believing that God exists and believing in his promises. So Abraham had faith. Abraham had faith, children. That's all Abraham had, which was a good deal because it was all he needed. At times, it looked as if God wasn't going to keep his promise to Abraham. For one thing, it was about 100 years before Abraham and his wife Sarah, who used to be called Sarai, had a baby named Isaac, who thankfully was always called Isaac. So his name didn't change. So Abram changed to Abraham and Sarai changed to Sarah. But Isaac was always Isaac. That's easy to remember, isn't it? And then, when the baby grew into a boy, God told Abraham to kill him. What? What's that about? That must have seemed like a not-so-fun way to make a great nation out of Abraham. But Abraham listened to God always. And at the last second, God gave Abraham a ram instead of his beloved son. It was God's way of saying, I'll take care of you. I will rescue you. Just trust me. Eventually, Isaac grew up, got married, and had some kids of his own. Twins, to be exact, Esau and Jacob. God picked Jacob to get the blessings, even though he was the youngest brother and wasn't supposed to get the blessings. But God is God, so he gets to pick. Jacob had 12 sons. Do you see the pictures there? 12 sons. Well, the picture has a little bit more there, but there were 12 sons. And he chose to bless Judah. Now, Judah's the one with the crown on the head. You see there? He chose to bless Judah, who wound it up with the best blessing. Jacob told Judah that a lion of a leader would come from his family. Great blessings, but not so great people. Isaac was sort of a weakling. Jacob was a selfish trickster, and Judah did some dumb stuff. We don't even want to talk about all the things that Judah did. And yet, again and again, God kept his promises all the same. He blessed the whole lot of them, despite themselves. Maybe that snake crusher would come from the gnarled branches of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's family tree. Sure, what a story today, children. Once again, let's ask ourselves those two important questions. Who was the story about, and what happened? So, who was our story about today? It was about, that's it, Ulrich. It was about Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob and their children. And what do we see God doing? And obviously it's about God. So it's about God and the people that God has now chosen for himself. And he chose Abraham and Abraham's children. And what do we see in the story? That God is being faithful. Was Abraham good and perfect? No. Was Isaac good and perfect? Were Esau and Jacob good and perfect? No. And neither were his children. But they had faith. They trusted in God. And even though they couldn't get everything right all the time, they trusted in God and had faith. And we see on God that he is continuing to be faithful to his people. Once again, children, aren't we thankful for how graceful, yes, full of grace, and how faithful our God is to his people? Well, children, I pray that you will hear these truths, that God is continuing to be faithful to the people that he has chosen. Blessings, children. Enjoy the activities that Auntie Estelle has sent out. Those bulletins are wonderful. Take some time during this week to do that and enjoy them. And we cannot wait to see more of you on a Thursday. Lots of love, blessings. Should we do the hamburger heart? Let's hold it out and bite. Blessings, children. Lots of love.